Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another exciting episode of Rise in Real Estate. Today we have our awesome guest, Alicia Dale. How are you today, Alicia?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate you making time to come in and actually come to our studio space.
The studio space. Outside of that too, she also brought us an outline.
If you're going to have guests on a show, pro advice, have somebody as organized as Alicia because she'll do the show for you.
We're going to have more writers on here.
Yes, writers are a good tip.
Because we got an outline. We got basically what we need to work off of at this point.
It's exactly right. Exactly. So today, I'll give just a brief overview of really why we had you in. I think you have such a fascinating story in your professional investing life and your personal investing life. And we'd love to know more about that. So not to dig in too detailed yet, but why don't you just start maybe with an overview of, a little bit about yourself and what brought you to us today.
Sure. Owning property was always a family value in my family. And I remember when my parents bought their first house when I was 3 years old. So we rented prior to that. And it was always in my mind that I'd like to invest. And I was a small business owner for 14 years. And my clients were middle market companies, and either by design or by accident, they had portfolios of property. So I would hear their stories and hear them talk about it. And it just seemed like an additional smart extra revenue stream to have. One business that I'd worked with was a manufacturing company in Elk Grove Village. And that guy owned his manufacturing facility. And he said, when the market goes down, I can slice it up and I can rent it out and I can sublease it. If I need to get a loan, I can take a loan against this asset. Mm-hmm. So I always have this tangible asset. And those ideas kind of stuck in my head. And when I had the opportunity to invest, I jumped at it.
That's fantastic. I think what you just said is so critically important. I think most major investors have figured out the value of owning the asset. Right? Because it gives you options. Long term, if you do run into any hardship, you have something that you can divvy out and make some money off of, hopefully.
Yeah, I call myself a micro investor. And sometimes people, they're afraid to jump in because they think I'm too small. But the way I look at it is if you do something small, you can always scale. Mm-hmm. So you learn the operations, you learn the nitty gritty, and then you get bigger and you get better. So, I wanted to share this story because I think it'll help your listeners and it'll help many people out there because people don't talk about this. But my credit was nabbed in 2003. So
really? That's terrifying.
You hear about that more frequently than you would think.
Truly, like top key things I lose sleep over. Credit being stolen is probably one of them.
It's scary, especially when I've broken the news to people. Hey, Derek, that account doesn't look right, or I don't have that. I'm like, well, it's on your report. And you can just feel the fear going on.
So how did you discover it? What happened?
Well, this was the early 2000s, so we have to kind of look at the frame of what's going on. So one of my favorite sayings is, you can't step in the same river twice because you're not the same person. It's not the same river. So everything I'm talking about that happened in the early 2000s is not true today. But this was in the money heyday. I mean, they were throwing credit cards at us, no interest, pull this credit card and pay that credit card. And money was just falling from the sky. And I was a small business owner. I was like, this is great. So I wanted to get a credit card and I was making money and I'm relatively conservative, but I do take risk when it's available to me. And there was a credit card where I could get miles. I'm like, yeah, why not? I was traveling all over the place and I get denied. I'm like, denied. So just like your conversation, you have to break that news. So I called the credit card company and they're like, you have a delinquency on your report. I'm like, a delinquency? This is not possible.
Wow.
So they send me, I get a copy of the report and I see this delinquency. So I start digging. So I call and they're not nice to you when you call. I mean, these credit people are awful. And they are out to get the money, and I don't remember how much money it was, but they're like, you give me $10,000 today and I'll make it go away. I'm like, I'm not going to give you $10,000 for something I didn't do.
Yeah.
And something I don't know and something you can't document. And can these things just show up on your credit report? Don't you get warnings or something?
You would think there has to be a notification or there should have been a letter.
This day and age there is.
Yeah, I guess this is
again,
true,
this is maybe near 20 years ago too.
Right.
So stuff like that could happen.
Yes. So I kept digging and digging and digging, and I kept calling people. And I think that's one of the keys to my success. Just asking questions, finding people, don't take no for an answer, don't stick with things that don't make sense, and also know the law. I love the law, and people are so afraid of the law.
Absolutely.
But if you study it and you know what the parameters are, you're probably the smartest person in the room, even maybe smarter than some attorneys, because they specialize.
Mm-hmm.
So every attorney has their own discipline. So you can't just ask one person and then they give you their opinion, and it may or may not be right.
Correct.
So what I found out was I was divorced in 1997. So it's 2003. Apparently the debt was my ex-husband's.
Really?
But I
still
was
writing against.
Divorced many years.
Yeah.
So it was his debt, but it landed on my report.
Wow.
So my accountant, whom I adore, said, oh, you're just going to have to pay it. I said, I'm not going to pay it. So I went crazy. And then I started looking and searching, and I found an attorney who doesn't exist today. And that's the interesting thing, is when things are going on, people pop up to fight it because
to do that one specific thing.
Yeah.
So he had a firm that focused on lemon laws for cars, which are not really necessary now, as well as these credit things. So I called him and I said, don't I get a notice? He said, yes. All these things should have happened. You should have been noticed. The credit card report companies can't just put it on your report. Like, all these things need to happen.
Yeah.
So he agrees to take my case in such a way where he makes money when we win. So we do it. It takes me a year. My file's this big.
Wow.
It's a foot big for our audience. I mean, and I put my business on hold to fight this. And my accountant said, I have never seen anyone with fire in their belly like you. But I was outraged. So then
as you should be.
I'm calling these people and they're like, you have to call your ex-husband. I'm like, the statute of limitations is up on that relationship. We divorced in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is split. It's 2003. So I won, short story.
Wow.
And I got a settlement from the creditor and the 3 bureaus. But I had to pay taxes on the income. So the attorney took 60% and then I got 40%, but I had to pay taxes on the revenue that I earned. It wasn't a lot, like maybe $5,000 or $10,000. So I wanted to fight it. And my accountant's like, Alicia, you need to let it go. You won.
Yeah. You won it at this point. Okay. You won. Right.
Sometimes the fight is over.
The fight was over. And
wow.
But what I learned of this very unfortunate experience is most of credit issues happen inside families. So if someone is a junior or their name is very similar, and then the family won't prosecute against their son or their father, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. And then as I was calling these creditors, again, you're the smartest person in the room when you're calling these people, and they would say, debt is a marital asset and you are responsible. I go, first of all, it's debt, and debt is not an asset. So it's not an asset.
Correct.
And also I am divorced.
Yeah.
So I was telling my dad about it. My dad was an immigrant, and he said, it's because you didn't change your name. So my last name was his last name, which was a very easy last name. And my family last name, my dad was born in Lithuania. My mom was born here, but her parents were born there. It was Vaitskas. And that was the shortened, Americanized version. The original version was Vaitkevichus. So I would go to business meetings and I'd spend all my time spelling my name, talking about my ethnicity. So Dale is actually my middle name. So I dropped my name legally, and then I just made Dale my legal last name, much easier to say, and it was really cool with my passport.
And all this complicated, obviously it makes your day-to-day easier now. And I know that too, right? It's so much easier to just say a quick name.
Thomas,
Matt Thomas. It's quick, right?
Yeah.
Now, people might not remember which Matt Thomas I am, but that's a different story.
And you better check your credit report.
And I have to check my credit report. But I do, that is so much pain to go through to recover something, A, that was never yours, and B, to get out of something that you never started.
And these are big agencies, and these are big companies. These are big multi-billion-dollar companies, and I'm just a consumer.
Yeah.
And then they're telling me I have to, in order to be able to function, I have to pay it. I'm like,
and we've seen this before. You hit a very important topic on the head, that we have clients come to us to buy a home. that don't recognize they have hanging issues from family members and credit scores.
Yeah.
You can think of one of our earliest transactions ever.
Oh, yeah.
We went through a surprise bankruptcy on file.
Oh.
And it was because his mother had co-invested with him in college to buy the rental house. And when he moved on, she just let it fold and didn't think it would impact him. And they never thought they'd have to talk about it until he went to buy a home. And sure enough, we ran a credit report and he's got bankruptcy. So there are certain hanging issues that the reason we always say talk to Derek, talk early with your financial planner, talk about your credit score early and often is because there's significant risk if you don't know what's on your credit score.
Oh yeah, especially like because we want to have some time to figure it out too, right?
Yes.
Like I've seen a lot of credit issues, some of which will take a couple months to figure out. And if you come talk to me,
if you need a house in 30 days,
it's going to be very, very difficult. You know?
Right.
And one point that you touched on that I wanted to elaborate on a little bit is like when you're dealing with the credit bureaus, it almost kind of depends who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you got to get past that first gatekeeper of who's picking up the phone at the 1-800 number. And I've dealt with people who don't know what they're talking about, who don't want to help. And I've also dealt with people who know exactly what's going on and will put you right forward to who you need to talk with. So like you touched on that a little bit of like just like kind of running into a wall when you're dealing with some of these. And sometimes it just is a matter of calling back. Right?
Yeah.
Hanging up and calling back and seeing who you get next on the queue.
Yes, and I actually did that. And my other trick was polite.
Oh, kill him with kindness.
Sweet
Is such
as
a
you can be. Sweet as you can be.
I know you didn't cause this, but I hope you can fix it.
How you doing today?
So you went down this whole path with stolen credit. And now correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline here, but you recovered from that whole incident and putting your business on hold and then invested in property afterwards, correct?
Exactly. And that's what I'm just learning from Derek, that was like a happy accident. That wasn't a smart strategic thing on my point. It was just rage of being treated wrong. And I do use Credit Karma now, so I get little pings and I see that, but I'll also add, I'm such a self-starter that when I legally changed my name, I did it with nolo.com, and I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But I went to court and the judge said, Alicia, I'm going to have to ask you 2 questions. They're embarrassing questions, but please, you need to answer them. And 1, are you trying to get out of debt? And I said, I'm not. And he said, 2, are you a sexual predator? And I said, no. And those are the 2 things. And the other thing, and God bless him, he said to me, keep this document because you will need it.
100%.
And get 10 copies. You're going to have to pay extra, but get them.
Laminate it too.
Yeah, no kidding. Can you imagine not having it?
Put it framed up on your wall.
I didn't laminate it, but I do have them in my file. Now, this is 2003. We're in 2022.
Yeah.
And with the pandemic, I put my primary residence on hold. Do you know I had to pull out that document? Do you know? How many years is that? 20 years.
Yes, that's
20
crazy.
years.
No doubt about it. I'm positive that.
So I'm like, thank you for that, Judge. And I think that's one of the secrets too, is just keep talking to people and asking people and ask for people and get answers that make sense, and don't stop until you do. So yes, it was a very happy accident that happened to me when it happened to me, and nothing was going wrong in my life except I couldn't take another 0 interest credit card and go to a cash station and get money out. But maybe that was a good thing.
That could have been a good thing too, especially no kidding.
So it was 2006 and there were no doc loans, and I live in the South Loop. I love the South Loop. I've been there since 1995.
Oh, that's fantastic. South Loop has changed so much since 1990. South Loop changed a lot in 5 years, but 1995, I mean, you've
last
seen
year.
Nobody lived there.
Yeah.
And I know it's illegal, but even realtors tried to steer me from buying there.
Really?
Yeah.
At the time when you were buying?
They were like, do not buy there.
I wish that surprised me, but we've seen that in this industry for far too long. I mean, it's a serious problem. So that's terrible, but I'm glad that you persevered, to go through.
It was terrible, and I didn't listen to it because I grew up in Chicago. I grew up on the Southwest Side in Brighton Park, and I'm an urban person. I grew up in a city, so I know what cities are like, and it met all my needs.
Yeah.
I mean, I was close to work. Back in 1995, there was free parking on the streets. That was really nice, and it was easy to get to. You couldn't get a taxi. The taxi drivers called it the black hole. And now they talk about a grocery store desert being 6 blocks. 6 blocks. I can walk 6 blocks.
Right.
I mean, there wasn't a grocery store for miles. I mean, you had to pay $20 for a box of cereal at the convenience store on the counter, on the corner. And But it met all my needs. It
Mhm.
was economically in the price range I wanted to be. I liked the eclectic people it attracted.
Right.
All interesting, different kind of people. And we used to have loft walks back then, and it was no big deal. It was just like everybody put in $10 and you kind of show how you decorated your loft and your place, and like each place was so different and interesting. I couldn't get friends to come down. I'd like just buy a bulk of tickets and I'd be like, come on down, it'll be so much fun. They're like, yeah, no, not that neighborhood.
Really?
No,
We're staying north.
So different.
Yeah.
we're staying north.
So
But-
your first investment was what type of property in South Loop?
yeah, so this is the no doc loans.
Yeah.
And I think I can name the building. It was Printer Square.
Mhm.
And that's 480 units, and everything was on fire. You know, the world was great and money was great and everything
Yeah.
was perfect, and no doc loans came up. And I thought, I love my little condo in the South Loop. So I'm just going to buy another little 600 square foot, no doc loan condo. I was a business owner, so, really nice that I didn't have to go through all the rigor. I mean, I am a risk taker, but I'm a calculated risk taker. So I wasn't rogue. I mean, the way I look at it is plus or minus 20%. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's a small condo. It's not a lot of money. I mean, I'm not gonna be, totally leveraged if I do this.
Regardless of what happens with the investment.
Right.
Yeah.
But just like 6 months ago, when people were selling properties $100,000 over appraisals and no walkthroughs and it was kind of like that. So I'm there and I'm ready to buy the property and I have my down payment, and all of a sudden, for no reason, because they can, they're like, we want more. I'm like, what do you want? It's crazy time.
More?
So we want more.
Because they think they deserve it.
They think
I'm
they
sure you
deserve
do want
it.
more. I want them to pay less.
We all want more now that I think about it.
So I have 4 sisters, and I called my one sister who's older than me, and she's a CPA. And I'm like, hey, I want to buy this property. You want to go in on it with me? And she's like, oh, I don't know. And, what about this? And can we see it? And is there a walkthrough? No, we can't. This is so great, and you have to buy it. And so she gives me some money, and we buy it. And it goes underwater immediately. And it's still less than what I paid for it. So on paper, this seems like a terrible investment. And I know many people would say, Alicia, you're crazy. This was not a good thing. But it rents effortlessly.
Wow.
Sure.
I get the nicest tenants. It's never, ever been empty. I mean, I could write books about my tenants. One guy came from the Peace Corps. Another was a PhD student from Canada. Another woman was she went to join the FBI.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just like all these, young professionals, people who want to live there. It's a really cute condo. It's a sturdy condo. The management is outstanding. So it'd be interesting to get your perspective, but if I were to map it out, there's so many good things about it.
Right.
Great shape, great building, great management, great maintenance, accessible. It's right in the middle of everything, easily rents, and you haven't lost money until you've sold.
Absolutely. I think that's, the key to this all is nothing's firm until you sell, right? So longevity or the ability to last is key in real estate. But I think one thing that you talked about throughout that, numerous points of your decision making, you needed flexibility. Flexibility in the financing when you needed to find more cash. Flexibility in understanding the asset itself when all of a sudden it wasn't going to resale for as much as you thought it was, but you have income potential with your rent. And the last part of it is if you have no vacancy, which is a crazy thing, like that on and of itself is a golden goose, right?
Right.
So if you have no vacancy and great tenants and it's rent rolling, you just switch investor strategies, right? To buy it and then sell it long term. Now you're a landlord. So it's so amazing to me. And I think where a lot of investors fail is you hit hiccups along the way, unexpected things that come up, particularly with financing often. And people stop. They stop trying because, I don't have the delta. I don't have the cash to close the delta. When in reality, if a good deal exists and if it's there to be taken advantage of, you can find other interested parties. And I'm glad that you called somebody you trust, like, hey, I have a sister who could get in on this.
Well, and then one day she wanted out. So, and then my life was in a good spot, and I just gave her a check. And then being the accountant, she said, well, we need to look at a market analysis. I said, you know what? You gave me 10 grand.
God bless family.
10 grand. I know.
You're out of here.
I was like, you're out of here. But also, this was such a huge act of trust because it was all in my name.
Right.
So she was willing to give me the money, but she was not willing to put her name on it, which was actually probably wise. But
you assume the risk, she'll assume the
then
finance.
I don't think she gets any of like the profit.
She wouldn't have gotten the profit
She didn't
had
take the
there
risk
been
on.
there been profit, but also she, we're just different sides of the same coin.
Right.
I'm
How
plus
you
or
think
minus
about
20%.
Right.
I'm like, let's roll with it. I feel good about it. And I listened to your podcast, and Derek, I heard you say, I love your words about flexibility and how you frame that like I was so smart, but it was really like, I just want to do this. And but you talk about a buy side analysis, and I call it a real estate vibe.
Yeah.
Like I have a real estate vibe, and that my vibe says this little condo is a little golden goose. I mean, I just love it. And, I've been there now for 30 years. I never, ever, ever expected to be in the South Loop for 30 years. But one thing I thought is like I could, if I had a family member that wanted to stay, or one of my nieces and nephews, maybe they'd want to go to school downtown Chicago. None of these dreams panned out, but it's still there. Or say, for instance, like I needed a caretaker in my life. I could put them in that condo, and then they could come over, and everybody has their own space. So, I mean, I love it.
Well, and South Loop is continuing to develop. You just got the NEMA building, among others, which is one of the most expensive in Chicago, right? So I think that there's a lot happening in South Loop that is continuing in a positive trend, right? You're right. 20 years ago, nothing was happening. But now everything you hear about South Loop is new development, new business, new commercial space. So,
and I wasn't brilliant. I just liked it.
And
it met my needs.
Yeah.
It met my needs. It wasn't that I was thinking like, wow, this is so great and I'm going to make all this money. So then when I bought that little condo, and it still is less than I paid for it all these years later, my attorney is like, Alicia, you want to make money, you need to buy multi-unit property.
Right.
That's what you need to do. And I was like, So that little seed was in my head. And I was afraid, it's like, how do I manage? I don't change a light bulb.
Right.
Nothing. I have zero kinesthetic ability. I'm a thinker. I'm notes. I'm organized. I'm a communicator, but I don't do stuff.
Fair.
And
that makes you a great property manager.
I don't do anything. But I'm a great communicator, and I'm wonderful at finding experts and contractors, and I treat them well, and they love it. And we just have such great partnerships. So everything's going great. My business is going great. Everything's wonderful. 2008 hits. And 2008 was like nothing anybody had ever seen. And now we're not even that far away from it, and people don't even remember. But
it's amazing.
My business owner colleagues were begging to keep their kids in college. And I had worked at a bank at one time, and I worked in the Community Reinvestment Act, and I was the marketing specialist, and I'd go out with the mortgage broker, and he was a black man, and we'd go into the church basements, and we'd say, don't worry, the bank doesn't want your property. And we believed it 100% because that's what we were told in those years. And then 2008, everything was different. And then, I mean, it was so horrendous. So my business was largely focused on sales and finance. So one of the things you learn in sales is interest rates aren't an excuse. The economy is not an excuse. Make one more phone call, but everything was falling apart.
Yeah.
Like everything I did to run my business was not working. I used to rent a hotel room downtown, and I'd do a conference, and I'd invite people, and they'd come, and I'd get ROI. Nothing. Just down, down, down. I got really depressed. I'm not reluctant to admit that.
Yeah, I don't think you were alone in that either.
I feel like people are going through some of that right now too. Just like seems
similar
to be
vibes
falling apart.
Yeah.
I mean, and people see that. The one part that stuck out to me is like whenever you hear or read about investing, it's always about just doing it, right? Just jumping in and doing it. It seems like that's what you did, right?
Yeah. Well, again,
and you had no idea this was coming, obviously,
No
but still,
idea.
I mean, you can't time the future.
You can't time the future, and you can just that's one thing too. I look at it as look at the landscape of your life. What's going on right now?
Yeah.
So I had a successful business. Everything was great. One time credit flowed freely, but right now the world is falling apart. And my intellectual mind went, interest rates are low, properties are abundant. Take the money you have left and put it in a property.
Yeah.
So I started looking, and now my income was like nothing. So I've got like $200 a month coming in, and my expenses, and I'm conservative, so my living expenses like $2,000 a month. But I'm way underwater.
Still, right? There's a 10x delta. Yeah.
Let's look at that percentage wise. It's like 10%, and I remember I had to go to a credit counselor, and she was like, "Alicia, are you giving up your Starbucks?" I'm like, "I am. I've given them up, and I'm just trying to like survive and see what's going on."
Those little increments matter. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I started looking, and I started looking with a realtor, a good friend of mine, who was in a business group with me, and I'd hear her talk every week, and I'd hear the attorney talk every week. And so what that did for me was being in a business group with real estate professionals was it demystified it for me. I was like, I could do that. I could do that. I'd hear their stories, and I'm like, So I called her, and we started looking, and her world was falling apart as well. Real estate was falling apart as well. So she became certified as a short sale specialist.
Wow.
That was really cool.
And those we still have short sale specialists, certainly, but there are fewer of them. But I think there was a time and period where short sales were like the abundance of transactions.
People were only looking for.
Right. It was every investor, every buyer. Yeah, they're back. We still have some. Less so in Chicagoland, but they're out there.
Yes. So in Chicagoland, I understand that they were rare at that time. Like foreclosures were one thing, but short sales weren't another. So I was just looking. I just kept looking, and I really wanted to buy in Avondale.
Oh, I love Avondale.
I love Avondale.
I'm thinking about the contrast of Avondale and South Loop in my mind.
Well, Avondale reminded me a lot of Brighton Park, where I grew up. Walkable community, bread and butter community. Families, multi-level living. I just really liked it. And we looked and looked and looked, and it was awful. Yeah. I mean, as much as the recession hurt me as a small business owner, to see what it did to families was heartbreaking. Yeah. So we would go into these buildings, and kids in their school uniforms would be showing us the buildings, and there were holes in the floor, and I mean, everyone was just hanging on by a very thin thread. And because I didn't have any money, I was taking the bus from the South Loop or the L to get to Avondale or whatever. And I was looking at all these properties on my own, which in retrospect wasn't so smart from a safety perspective. Yeah. And people were angry. So they were running the water so that the pipes would break, and just bad things were happening. And I just kept looking and looking and looking. And I suppose it was a buy-side analysis, but I was looking for that property that would fit my vibe, and I found one luckily in Irving Park. Yeah. So I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting to get the Irving Park neighborhood. I was expecting to get that, but it was great. It was close. Now, what I used to do, I really cared about being close to transportation. But now with Uber and Lyft and other options, I don't think that that's as important as it is.
We used to hear it a lot more, and we've heard it a little bit more as Uber and Lyft prices have gone up. Yes, because now that it's not getting its price effective, when it costs you $30 to go to work, when it used to cost you $15, that's a different situation. So I will say I'm starting to see transportation come back into play. Okay. But yeah, you're absolutely right. With this evolution of rideshare or Divvy or apps, or even people are riding bikes or whatever, people have figured it out.
The other thing I like to do is I like to be right next door to the cool neighborhood. Because that worked for me in the South Loop.
That's still like the most sound investor strategy ever. You go on the bleeding edge of the most up and coming neighborhood, and you wait for the overflow, because inevitably it happens.
Well, when I was in the South Loop, I thought I get everything the Gold Coast gets, but I have a less prestigious zip code and a lot less expense. Yeah. But I still get everything they get.
Same
I can
access.
Go to the theater, I can go to the lake, I can, so being next door. So Irving Park is just a little bit west of Wrigleyville. And you can take a shuttle bus there, and you can, do that if you want to do it, but you're not going to have people partying until 3 a.m, which I think is very nice.
That is not like living on Clark Street in Lakeview, right?
It's a benefit.
Very different thing.
It's a benefit.
Yeah.
So after a year of looking, taking buses, walking, losing weight, because I was
and that's
totally
important too.
A
year of looking while being stressed, while being in this situation. I mean, you don't always find these opportunities quickly, as I know buyers are experiencing now, because the time it takes to find a home in this limited inventory is very difficult. Yeah. But you stuck it with it for a year of looking.
was nothing else going on.
Yeah, I guess that's true, right? You
My
gotta do
business
something.
was-
And you had an idea of why it was important, right? And
Yes.
so it was just about, it was not a matter of like, will I find it? It's just when. You know it's out there, you got to find it when.
Yes.
Right?
And also my realtor stuck with me.
Yeah.
So
That's
that was very important. And so I found it, and here was a mistake I made, and I'll share it for the audience, was I thought because people lived in something, it was livable.
Mm.
Yeah. So there was, just because it wasn't
It's sad, but you find out quickly. That's not
short
true.
sale status, like the gas was hooked up illegally, the electric was hooked up illegally, and it was a very sad story. It was everybody was trying to make their billions, and it was a family that lived in it for 13 years, and the son was going to make his money in real estate, and the family went behind him, and he just got upside down, which was very easy to do back then because it was just all over the place. So I was hoping to be able to do it on my own.
Yeah.
And I got close, but then I was very naive about repairs. I thought coat paint.
Coat of paint be done, right? Not the case.
Yeah.
Some foundation
I've been in
issues
this
or something.
issue so often. Yep. Yep.
So I call my sister again. Hey, I found this building. The world's falling apart. We're the single ones. It's me and you. She has 2 kids. I was like, it's us. I was like, we need to do this. All the guys that I work with, they help each other. They invest in each other. We need to do it. And she says, yes.
That's
Again.
amazing. I love it.
Did she parlay that extra $10,000 you gave her into it, or what?
She might have. I have ideas. She can write a check. So my realtor is like, I cannot believe that you convinced a single woman with 2 children in college to invest in this crazy idea. But I did.
That's fantastic. Well, again, it comes back to the basics, though. You had a plan. You found an idea. You found something that would work. Okay, we made a mistake. We underestimated the budget for the renovations. That's actually fairly common.
I was going to say that happens majority of the time. With
And
my
now
house.
it's even harder to guess with how expensive everything is.
Yeah.
But I think that in the grand scheme of things, it goes back to the premise of the better prepared you are and the more focused you are on what you're seeking, the more you can ignore the bullshit, right? And the bullshit would be, oh, all of a sudden I'm a little bit shorter. I made a mistake on my repair values. But as long as the idea is sound and you're focused, you normally can get through that and you can still find success.
Well, I love talking to you both because you make me sound so much smarter than I really am.
Better be lucky than good,
I will
right?
rewrite this. Yeah. But actually, the way you're feeding it back to me, that is true. I just didn't look at it that way. So now we have it and we buy it, and I'll share this. So we're at the closing table, and then I don't know what it's called, but like when there's outstanding liens or taxes,
Oh, yeah, unclear title or cloud on title.
stamps, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm there with my attorney, and we're at the table, and I think Jenny, my sister, gave me power of attorney. So no, she was there actually, and she was there. So we're there, and I'm sitting across the table from a mother and a son, and the mother's dressed beautifully, and the son is, of course, very remorseful, and they're losing their family.
Gosh,
home.
you're bringing me back in time because we really very rarely do closings now where all parties are there.
I don't think I've ever been to one. where all
We've
parties
learned
are
our
there.
lesson that it can create some tension
There's
from both parties.
separate rooms.
So
Usually
we now
crossed
have
out.
sellers pre-sign docs
Yeah.
and buyer signs on their own. But I'm thinking about literally the situation of you being in this room with this family. I mean, I actually can't imagine. That's like a whole new level to this.
Well, my very first home was a bungalow, and we bought from the neighborhood crazy lady, and she lost it at the closing, and she kept saying we were stealing from her, and she said, just kept crying, and I was like, we don't have to do this, and the attorneys are running around, we have to do this, and the real estate agents are, we have to
Like,
do
you
this.
guys should close.
Just close.
We
Yeah.
did close, but I thought, hey, I don't want to be responsible for stealing all your family memories.
Yeah, no
If that's
kidding.
what you think. But yeah, so it was tense. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that they don't do that anymore. Actually, with my last closing, I was not there, and I thought it was due to COVID, but the emotional strain of it was
It's tough.
rough.
And somebody feels like they're in that situation, particularly maybe feels like they lost or they're being taken advantage of. And you don't want that to come through, and you're not trying to do that necessarily, but it is a reality.
Well, and because it was a short sale situation, there were offers that fell through.
Right.
So they had been through this a couple times.
Right.
Gotcha.
And I don't remember the exact thing, if it was taxes or liens or whatever, but they didn't have it.
Yeah.
And they needed to come up with maybe $1,500 or something, and they didn't have it. So they're like, we do not have it. we've been through hell and back and we don't
Can't do
have
it.
it.
Yeah.
So my attorney looks at me and he says, no, you're not doing this deal. So then he pulls me over to like where the coffee station is. He's like, no, I'm your attorney. I'm advising you, don't do it. And he goes, you're going to get into an eviction situation and your whole life is going to be awful. And I just, again, I want to hear your words, but I trusted my vibe. And I went, I'm sitting across the table from a mother and a son.
Yeah.
And they've lived here for 13 years and they've been on this block forever. And I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go with it.
Good
I'm going
for
to
you.
roll the $1,500 and he's mad at me. We're yelling at each other. And because we're like brother and sister now, we go back 20 years.
I'm happy to hear you have an attorney that'll fight for you that hard, because if you're in a fight like that with the professionals you're working with,
he will fight.
that is for your best interest, right? It's not because they're against you. They're just worried.
Right.
That was exactly right. And that's what I said to him. You are my attorney. You are advising me. I see it clearly.
Right.
I'm going to jump.
But I'm choosing to go a different
I'm gonna go the
I
complete
hear you.
opposite
I'm
route.
going the other way. That's true. That's
But
why it's
I
advisors.
hear you. I hear you. So we do it. But
Good
while
for you.
I'm reckless, I'm not dumb.
Yeah.
So then I find my contractor, and that's a whole nother story. But I'll give you a quick story on we close, and my contractor's like, okay, I see what you did.
Mhm.
Every day at 6 a.m., we're starting to work.
Yeah.
So, we don't make it easy for them to stay there. We get there, we're cleaning,
Yeah.
we're working, and man comes out. He's
It
like,
is very clear we're moving forward.
we'll be gone in 6 days. And I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
and then they just left tons of garbage and tons of stuff. But they did leave, and I didn't have to go to an eviction place. And the mom, when she left, the house was on Sacramento Avenue, and she said, this house is going to bless you. And it did.
That's
It did.
great.
And
I
it's
think
called Sacramento.
you can't really put a word or a system to identifying the people across from you in a deal. It's one of the most difficult parts of negotiating in reality, is because we only have so many terms we can actually work within a contract. And then there's the people involved, and the
That's
people
right.
involved are the hardest part to figure out. And so when I hear, your attorney advising you not to do it, his fear goes to, these are the worst people I've ever seen. They're here to screw you. Right. And that's like a professional training, because we're all trained in some sense to sniff that out. But what you made, and this is a tough decision that every investor has to make, is you just weighed the individual sitting there. And it's, okay, do I feel confident that if I make this decision that they'll uphold their end of the bargain? Right.
Mhm.
And I think what you did on top of that was intelligent, is you had a plan for, okay, how can I make sure that happens? Right. Because that's the other part of it.
Yes. Mitigated risk.
But what I
Mitigated.
love about your story, and it's come through in a lot of different ways, but you had an attorney who was there to help you through things. You had your sister who was there to help you through things. We just talked briefly about how you found contractors to help you through things, the relationships that you built along the way. And it goes back to your point of, I know how to plan everything. I don't do anything. When you have everybody in place, you don't need to do it, right? Like, you have an attorney, you've got a contractor, you have somebody who can help you on the shortage of financing. So you've got individuals that you can now pull in. That's when we talk about an investor team or making your strong team. That's a team. That's how you get a team.
That's right.
And it happened over
That's so
time,
true.
but you developed it, and that's incredible.
It's so true. And I just want to also say that I was prepared for it all to fail.
Yeah.
I was intellectually, so people think like, oh, you're so smart. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I kind of was smart, but I was also terrified a lot of the time, and just waiting and fully understanding that this could all go underwater. And then what would I do then?
Failure is a very real option in real estate. I think people tend to think, maybe it won't do as well as I thought it would. No, it could just fail.
It could
Blatantly
truly
blow
fail.
upon you.
Blatantly fall flat.
It could
So, like,
absolutely blow
Which it happens.
It does
that
happen.
stuff happens all the time.
But
You
I
just
think
wanna
you
be
have to have the
prepared.
mentality of, okay, if that happens, what would I do? You always want to have a contingency plan. You don't want it to happen, but it's like, plan for the worst, expect the worst, plan for the best, or I forget, plan for the worst, expect the best. There you go.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So my realtor introduces me to a contractor, and he meets me and he says, you are the single most naive person I've ever met.
He's like, we're going to basically do a gut rehab here.
You thought it cost how much? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's what it costs to get me out today.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Well-
going to take 4 months to get me back, too.
And again, as serendipity would have it, because we closed in 2010, because I looked for a year, 2008 happens, we don't know what's going on.
Right.
2009, I look, we closed in 2010.
Short sale takes time. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. My realtor, because nobody knew what a short sale was, and she was short sale certified. So again, we're the smartest people in the room. She got it in 6 months.
That's
not bad.
great for
It
a
was
short sale.
crazy.
We see some of these go a year plus. It's like
I've seen
ridiculous.
them over 18 months before.
And it was only because she was so organized.
Yeah,
She was so organized.
Well, and she was probably doing what you do, which is you keep calling and you keep hounding, and you keep getting the person on the phone, and then eventually you get it pushed through. Yeah.
Well, and she was a school teacher for a long time, and then she got a master's in organizational development. She worked in corporate America for years. She
That's
worked around
the right
the
short
country.
sale specialist. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she went into real estate in her early 50s, and then she did it for 20 years, and she just recently retired, but she's still investing, and we're still friends. So that goes back to that relationship. So we got it through in 6 months, and she'd be calling and they wouldn't know what it was, and she'd be like, here's what it is, and then she'd fax it, and then she'd keep it, and she'd stay right on top of it. So the contractor, he's like, who is this woman? And she's like, she's kind of onto something. So he did what I did at a much larger scale. So he got investors, and then he started buying buildings and turning them around. And but he said, here's what I'm going to do for you. You don't have enough money, I'm telling you right now. And he said, so you're going to give me your money right now, and that's going to pay for my hard dollar costs. And we're going to turn you around as fast as we can. And as soon as you're earning income, you're going to pay me back.
That's amazing.
It was amazing.
Truly, that's like a gift from God from a contractor.
It was a gift from God.
Do they still do that kind of stuff these days?
And we
I
did
think you have to find a very lenient business professional. Yeah.
We did it on a handshake.
Yeah.
We just did it on. But
when we talk about old school business, that is
old school business, and I think it was just again that relationship, that trust. And he said, I don't meet people like you. I don't meet people like you who are like thinking of the greater good and thinking of everybody and thinking of the mother and the son.
Right.
And, you know,
it's funny. He made the same decision with you that you made with the mother and the son. He looked at it. All risk says, don't do this. This is dumb. She can't pay for it. And he chose to proceed because of the person.
Well, and his business partner was not happy.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's too jacked up.
That means they're good business partners.
Yes.
So yeah, he had the same business partner I did, but I think the business partner got happy when they started doing it on a bigger scale,
right?
Because they had way more money than me. And what he said to me was, "I cannot keep my guy. You can't keep good people working if you don't have work." And he said, "I'm getting ready to lose my people."
Yeah.
So he didn't really know what was going on. So we got it done, but I still didn't have enough money to make it perfect. So I could only go as far as I could go. And then I got into tenant management. When I got tenants, I would start with a story because everybody's afraid of tenant management. And my realtor said, the tenants you choose are the single most important decisions that you make. So I would start with a story and I'd say, I grew up on the Southwest Side. I grew up in a 3-flat. My parents and I and my sisters lived on the bottom floor, rented the second and the third floor. Whoever woke up first, they shoveled the snow. I don't expect you to shovel the snow. I have a person to do that, but I want you to know that this is your home. I bought it with my sister. This is our retirement plan. We have nothing else. So I need you guys to work with me. And if there's something wrong, I'd like you to call me. So even if you think you can fix it, I'd like you to call me. Yeah. You can have pets. You know, I learned that from reading a book about rental management, like make sure that they know it's their home. You can use the yard.
That's great.
I want you to enjoy this. And I had really nice tenants.
And that is so different, I think, than most landlords, in my experience. It is very much not about the tenant. It is about the landlord and about the unit itself.
It's essentially like a list.
And the rules that they have, particularly around dogs or use of common space or anything like that, is usually meant more for perseverance of the property than it is enjoyment of the tenant, right? Like they're worried about their asset, not the people using it. And that's such a different mentality than the way you're describing your landlord relationship.
Well, and that's why I think private ownership is so important. As we go to corporate ownership, they're not going to care. I mean, we're seeing that now, aren't we?
They buy in waves, right? We've got Blackstone buying tens of thousands of properties, all single family, and they're renting them out. Those are portfolio properties for them. They don't care about your living experience. They want you to pay them until they sell it. That's what they want.
You know, dealing with issues, you're going to get like a 1-800 number.
You'll get a 1-800 mechanics number, and this is who we partner with regionally. Yeah.
Right?
Wow. So it's crazy, and it's gotten worse. And I think the reason you see so much negative sentiment out there around landlords is because those are what people think of when they see landlords. They see people who are unresponsive. They don't care about their tenants. They don't care about the asset really, other than the money it's making them. Whereas this is a situation where it's very personal to you. As you describe it, this is my retirement plan. I need you to help me take care of it. And I think there are a lot of tenants who will hear that messaging and respond very well. It's not surprising you've gotten good tenants.
They did. And also I would say, but your part of the equation is you have to pay the rent.
Yeah,
I can't
right,
float
right,
it.
right, right.
I can't worry about it. I can't chase you down.
There are some
I
things
can't
that are just
hunt you.
non-negotiable.
That is
you know.
non-negotiable.
That is it.
I will
Yeah.
take care of everything else. And I did take a security deposit. Even though it's very hard in the city of Chicago, it's not impossible. Nothing's impossible.
No, you just got to do it the right way, right?
just
That's
do it the
exactly
right way.
right. Follow the steps A through Z exactly as written, and you'll be fine.
Totally. That's
Yep.
exactly what I did. And then I would take the security deposit and I would say my intention is to give it back.
Mm-hmm.
This is just our contract that this is going to look like it looks today. And I plan to give it back. And I've never kept anything on a security deposit and give it back. And that works out just fine. I prefer to take security deposits. Some people are afraid, but I
Mhm.
do it. And then here's another nugget from my attorney is if they don't pay on the 5th, you have to send a letter. You
Yeah.
have to send a notice. And he said, Alicia, I know you have a big heart, but you need to send the letter because if you don't send the
Legally.
letter,
Mm-hmm.
then things are going to get bad. And then if there is a bad situation, they can ghost on you somehow and you can't find them and you can't serve them, but send them the letter. So what I would do on the 4th, and these are all busy people,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say, today's the 4th, tomorrow's the 5th. I just want you to know, I'm sure you're going to pay it. But my attorney says that I need to send you a delinquency notice. I know you're going to pay it, but,
But I have to do this.
but I have
Yeah.
to do this. And then boom, I get the money,
Mhm. Yeah.
But again, it's just knowing the process, knowing the system, communicating it well. And then with tenants, I turned over every stone to find people. So
Yeah.
rental agents will work with multiple people. I would do that. Back in the olden days, I would put flyers together and I would put them, but now, social media is better for that.
Yeah.
And I would tell people and I would be very careful about how I write the ad. And I know you have to be careful, but in my downtown studio, I really prefer somebody who doesn't have a big SUV. Now, I
Yeah.
can't tell them to have it or not to have it, but it's
Right.
really not the lifestyle you're looking for. You're looking
Mhm.
for somebody who bikes, or you're looking for somebody who walks to work or walks to school. So in my write-up, I would write, very walkable community,
Right.
rated highly, bike, scoot, walk to work, and
Yeah.
I would just
Should write real estate descriptions.
I'm
I'm
sure
thinking
you keep
SEO
it
right now.
also. Yeah.
And I would just totally avoid the whole car thing,
Yeah.
and because there is parking down in the South Loop, but in that lot, your car's going to get all banged up. So
I'm curious from a lending perspective, do you see investors like this who trail the city? Because I think your story is so interesting. Like, you invested first in your local neighborhood, right? What you know most. And then your secondary expansion was, okay, now I want a multi-unit. I have this idea in my head of actual multi-unit investing. And you had a neighborhood, but you sacrificed on the neighborhood when you couldn't find a matching asset, right? So I'm curious, when you see other investors going through this process, and I know what I see from the actual search,
Yep.
do you find that that's the most logical place they start? Do they start in their local neighborhood and then expand out? Is it usually neighborhood independent?
I find that most people want to be somewhere close to where they're at,
They do.
right?
Yeah.
Because again, if you're going to be dealing with issues, you want to be able to get there.
Right.
Now, the one thing that you touched on during that question that I find often is people always start kind of big. Hey, Derek, I want a 4-unit property,
Yeah.
right?
Teeny
I want a
tiny.
3-unit
Yeah.
property, whatever it may be. And they typically end up buying a single unit property.
They default
right?
down to
Yeah, because
Yeah.
they don't know all the capital that goes into it, or
Mm.
they kind of dig into it and they'll look at the property with Matt, and when he's going through it unit by unit, they're starting to see all the work add up, and they're like,
Right.
this seems to be a little much.
Everybody's always surprised if the rent is softer than they advertise.
Right.
There's just
Like,
unexpected
this
things.
seems a little much. So I find people oftentimes they start off being like, hey, let's look at 3 or 4 unit buildings. I want to, let's start the search off at $1 million, and then they buy a $300,000 single family condo.
And then,
Right.
yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think
Mhm.
I would be the same way, where it's like, let me dip my toes into the water. Let me figure this out a little bit before I go take on $1 million multi-unit.
Well, I wonder, do you feel that you had more confidence going into the multi-unit because you had gone through this process with the smaller units first?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That with my attorney's guidance.
Right.
And then when he just explained it,
Mhm.
he said, regardless of how great that condo ever is, you're never going to have control over the assessment fees.
Right.
Yeah.
And those are going to go up and up.
Yeah,
And
we talk about that with people all the time. Your property taxes and your assessment fees are the two things you have very little control over. So,
Mhm.
you have to bake that in. And every owner in the world has to deal with the property taxes, but the assessments you control. And you can choose buildings that have lower or higher or none.
And I think that was it, like coupled with my experience and his stories and his advice. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just exactly right. And then also I had the courage because I'd already done it.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a big
now-
thing too. You would succeeded, not only done it, but done it more than once and been through it and been through difficult processes every time. Like you have such a unique buying process. All three were independently, difficult on their own right, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
In worst case scenario, you could always call your sister too, right? Get her back into it.
She actually, now that we've divested of the property, and it was totally an accident, it was no big deal, but she retired, and she has 2 grandchildren now. She has 2 daughters and another grandbaby on the way.
Wow.
And she
congrats.
said, yeah, it's exciting.
amazing.
And she said, I'm ready to get out.
Yeah.
It was just serendipity that we got out at the top of the market.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, we bought at the bottom and we got out at the top, but it wasn't like we were so brilliant. It was just like, now's the time, but we would have won no matter what because we bought so low. But it was crazy time 6 months ago, which now it's a whole new crazy time.
Isn't it ridiculous
It's
how fast that went?
Complete
Yeah.
opposite side of the
I
spectrum right
can't
now.
even believe it. We were getting like 18 offers on the building. One was $100,000 over ask.
Wow.
So I was a little bit nervous about the $100,000 over ask. So I Googled the person's name on the application and no digital footprint, none. So
Really?
None.
That's impossible.
Everybody has a digital footprint. Somebody has something
You've
out
all
there
been someone.
that, yes, exactly. So I call my attorney. He goes, wow, you're really smart. He goes, that was so smart that you looked at that. And I said, well, I used to do it on my tenants and it just made me nervous. So since we didn't say yes within 24 hours, that buyer moved on.
Mm-hmm.
And my realtor said, that's really bad practice. We don't encourage that, but everything's bad. But we still got over list price.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that just made me nervous. I just didn't feel good about it. But even people now criticize me today, like, oh, you should have taken that $100,000 over. I was like,
I mean, if they're not real, they're not. That's a
we
whole-
already won.
We have, believe it or
We
not, there.
doubled our
we
money. We
profited
more
off
than
of
doubled
that.
our money.
Yeah.
We
So-
have horror stories, and I wish I could explain to you on a psychological level the thrill of this, but we have people who hunt for the sake of hunting, and they will make offers with funds they never have. They'll focus on houses they never intend to buy. They'll get everybody tied up in it, down to the point of doing inspections and appraisals with no intention of finishing the
I
process.
had no idea.
I think to some extent it's like a faking a status thing. We often see one side
can
of a
see
spousal relationship very interested in a home, and then it just falls apart for God knows how many reasons. But we see this fairly often, and it's a very strange. So when you say, did I make a board decision? I don't know. I mean, if you can't find and vet somebody,
Right.
that's a very risky scenario.
I mean, we had someone last year who wanted to call and put in an offer. I think the property was $2.5 million. Went through the whole rigmarole, showed us the source of funds, and they put in an offer. I got a call from the listing agent immediately. He's like, I know this person.
Oh, wow.
And I go, this offer is not is basically worthless.
Wow.
So then we got back into it. We started looking at some of their bank statements and what they provided. A lot of it was manipulated.
Yeah.
A lot of it was faked.
Oh my gosh, now I'm getting scared again.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
See?
Well, let me
You
tell
may have
you.
avoided a pretty nasty
there-
situation.
there's no way you can really get that past nowadays in
Yeah,
the loan
it's harder.
process,
It's harder.
maybe with the no doc stuff. But it was just bizarre that the listing agent knew. They're like, yeah, I've ran into this fellow before. Like,
we start to know
they're
there's
doing
some
this.
people out there.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
So don't beat yourself up too much because you may have made a great decision.
I feel like we did because
Sounds
it
like you
closed
probably
really
did.
quickly, and we,
and you still made great money. Over
we
the
made
list
great
like
money,
this.
and my
Yeah.
sister and I said, we are not here to leverage people. I mean,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
did this, it worked out, we're excited, everything's great. So as far as what we'll do in the future, she may invest with her daughters. They have,
I like that.
they're both married to men from Iowa, and they keep going back to see those families. So my sister's like, why don't we buy something?
Invest
Maybe
in
we
Iowa.
create an Airbnb, or then when we go, we'll have
So
the kids.
smart.
And yeah, I think that would be really nice. And we also have like a good foundation. So as far as working with my sister, I wanted to put together a contract, and she said no. So what I did was I put together what I called a letter of agreement, and just bullet points of like,
How you're going to handle and manage stuff.
yeah, like what our thought process was. And we were both single at the time. And I said, so it's our property. Like
Right.
if we get together with someone else, it's not going to be their property. It's our property. And,
Yeah.
even though, it may not be smart on paper, we'll just split everything 50-50. Expenses, this, that. And, so boom, boom. And then we would have breakfast once a year, either at my house or her house.
Investor meeting.
Yeah, we'd have an investor meeting. I love your words.
Yeah.
And we'd sometimes cook or sometimes go someplace and we'd talk it again and we would just like reevaluate. And
Right.
that's when we decided at that 1 year, like, no, I'm done now. And I was like, okay.
That's the best way to do that, though. If you are going to do partnership agreements, have a strategy so that if somebody is going to exit, they can exit in an equitable way, and it'll be, it doesn't have to be nasty. Partnerships don't have to dissolve.
My
And
uncle's going through that right now with his brother with
yeah.
a second home, and they didn't necessarily have the conversations that you and your sister had, and it's definitely caused a rift.
Yeah.
Right? They're having issues because one wants to sell, one doesn't, and the one that wants to sell can't buy the other guy out.
right,
Or he can't
and
get
then you
bought
get
out.
stuck.
So
Yeah.
they're basically kind of bashing heads here about this property.
Well, and we did have rifts, but what happens with people you love is I can't even remember them. But
Yeah,
I remember
over
fighting.
time.
I remember arguing, and I remember going toe to toe. But we would work it out. We have good, family foundation. Our parents would haunt us if they ever found out we did something
Yeah.
terrible to each other. Just
That's a
absolutely,
good way of looking at that.
yeah,
I like that.
absolutely wouldn't happen. But again, she, being more rigid, rigid. I don't know if she'd like that word. Being more disciplined.
Yeah.
She created a trust so that should something happen to me that it would go to their daughters. But she also made sure that her daughters couldn't cut me out.
Yeah.
Which
That's great.
that was really nice. And we also found a female attorney in the western suburbs who helped us put it together. And she
I love the all-female work on this.
yeah,
Yeah,
she was
female
loving
team,
it.
yeah.
She was going, oh my gosh, that's so great you did this. And then I actually, at that point, I created an estate plan because I am a risk taker and entrepreneur. I do things that, some people might find somewhat risky. And I left everything to her just in case,
Wow.
just
Good
to
for you.
have that verification that I'll always do the right thing.
Well, that part of property planning, a lot of people overlook, I think. There is no plan in their mind of what happens. God forbid something happens to anybody involved in this investment. Where does it go? Where does it live? Who carries it for? I mean, that's an important thing to figure out up front.
So what would I like to do in the future? I mean, I talk to people, obviously, and I just bought my new cell phone, and the young man who sold it to me, he's an investor.
Hey.
Yeah, it was really fun. I asked him what his side hustle was, and he said, oh, I'm an investor, and he had to be under 30. And he told me about Facebook groups. So now I'm an investor of Facebook groups. And somebody put out the question, if you had $50,000, what would you do with it? And somebody said a luxury trailer. And I was like, I love that idea.
Yeah.
Or a tiny Airbnb.
I love
That
the
would
tiny
be-
little thing.
I have some friends that are basically buying and retooling trail parks now. Trailer parks. It seems to be pretty lucrative.
Yeah, they turn them into
Yes.
like a glamping experience, right? Where there's like a smaller place where you can stay, and then there's a community setting where you can go eat, or there's campfires or whatever, and they
I
rent out
love
each individual trailer.
Well, and what my real estate vibe now is saying is that people want multi-generational living. I'm seeing
so.
that in the South Loop. I'm seeing grandparents in condos, families
Particularly
in
with rent going so crazy, it hits both ends, right? You have grandparents who got to make rent, you have kids who got to make rent, and both parties got to go somewhere. So you see these families now that have gone out into the world, but are for one reason or another being driven back together by health, by cost, whatever. But we see it working a lot like
And
that.
I also think desire.
Yeah.
I mean, that
To be
whole,
close.
That
Yeah.
whole, I commute an hour every day and I never see my family or my kids, or my kids don't know my parents. I mean, I think people are going, wow, I really want this. And one thing that happened during the pandemic is our little parks started being used.
Yeah.
They're always used. I mean, there were blankets out there, there were people. I mean, it was the only thing that we could do. So it was really nice to see that. And if I were to move into the South Loop today and I had a family, I mean, 2 great schools there.
Yeah.
South Loop Community School, Jones Commercial High School, there's private schools nearby. To me, walking to work and walking to school is quality of life.
Yeah.
I am not a commuter. And that's one of the reasons that I moved into the South Loop so long ago. People were moving to Naperville. That was the big thing. 90-minute commute is not exciting.
People are still
for
moving to
me.
Naperville.
I hear it's a nice town. I've been once or twice.
Brutal.
Yeah.
It's not worth the commute.
I think if you live there, you stay there.
You
'Cause
stay
it's
there.
kind of a
You don't
small
have to-
They all
town.
say they're coming back down.
You don't come to the city.
Nobody comes from Naperville to hang out.
And I don't really like going from the city to Naperville either. It's a big pain in the ass.
Well, that's great. So I think, and maybe this is as good a point as any to kind of let you have some closing thoughts for the audience here, is you've been through one of the more truly and sincerely interesting buying experiences and selling experiences throughout these number of properties. If you were talking to a young investor thinking about getting started, or maybe who's afraid of the journey, what would you share with them? Down to maybe resources that you would recommend that would help them, or how you learned and enabled yourself, or just objective tips that you've learned from being a landlord, an owner, a successful seller and investor now.
I would say it's not hard, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say keep talking to people and asking. I would say to do it. It's a business where you can make an income and you can make a profit. And I think it's rewarding. It's tangible. It's something that you can, feel like, wow, I'm doing something, versus putting money in the stock market. I don't know what they're going to do with my money, but I can go and live in this property.
Right.
My realtor actually said, don't buy anything that you won't live in, because chances are you may have to.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that.
Great
before,
advice.
I do like that.
Like, you might have to live there sometime. Yeah.
And I would say too, look at the landscape of your life, like what works for you, and stay out of the narrative.
Yeah.
Because, just in these past 6 months, it's just been crazy. So if people can have roommates, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see these roommates buying and bringing their money together to buy something versus just to rent from someone else. I would do that.
Yeah.
It all comes to mindset. For me, I wouldn't like to have a roommate. Some people love it, and that's great for them, but I just hate to see them spending that money when they could be doing it together, and it's fun. I would say learn, ask questions, take resources, do things other people wouldn't do. I took a class at the Chicago Realtors Association.
Fantastic. And most people don't even recognize they have free public resources to non-real estate agents.
Like if I were a realtor, I'd get credit, but I didn't get credit. But I learned a lot. I had coffee with the man who gave the class, and he kind of gave us the ins and the outs. And I love it. I think that you should, if we had people that were business owners, we'd have 100% employment. If people thought
so
this
true.
way.
Yeah.
Sure.
We are such advocates on this show, on the podcast, and everything that we do every day of just general home ownership, but long-term wealth building through real estate. And I think that the way you started that was such a simple idea, and then expanding the way it did, and still having a focus forward on new opportunities that are expanding with the horizon, right? I don't think we would have been talking tiny homes 20 years ago, but I think the better you stay ahead of that, the more you enable yourself for the future. And it's truly, this has been a fascinating conversation. I hope that everybody's gotten a lot out of this, because I think we learned a lot as your co-host today. And
I learned a lot. I learned a lot just by sharing the story. And I guess I would say share the story too. Don't be embarrassed. And when 2008 hit, I was embarrassed to talk to my accountant. Now people are on speed dial. I ask questions and I'm not embarrassed.
If you don't say anything, how can you get help?
That's right.
You've got to bring in the right people.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. Wonderful. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow if you enjoyed this conversation. We will have links in the show notes so that you can get in touch with Alicia if you'd like to touch base. Thank you for your time today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, you. Alicia.